Hello, my friends, it's Elena Nikitina, and I'm going to read you the next chapter of my award-winning book, Girl Taken. I would really appreciate if you can write a comment, and thank you, as always, for listening to my story. It really means a world to me. So let's get started. Chapter 4. November 1994, Grozny, Chechnya. The war began November 26. From my tiny prison, I could hear the faraway echo of thunder peal of shooting and the rattle of machine gun fire. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't even know there was going to be a war. I realized something else was happening, something mysterious, something dangerous. I didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. Suddenly my captors, a criminal gang, had turned into a squad of militants. The apartment became loud with their rejoicing. Just after dark, Shorty came to my door. He grinned at me, very pleased at my helplessness and thrilled by something more. "Russian pigs invaded Chechnya today," he announced. "They stormed Grozny, but their army was smashed by our men. Can you picture it? Hundreds of dead Russians, despicable cowards. They deserved to die. You were very unlucky to be born Russian, do you know that? Hardly a Chechen was killed." It was impossible, too horrible to think about. Hundreds dead? I had become so isolated that the world outside my room had almost ceased to exist. My days were filled with loneliness and thoughts of my loved ones. I listened to music and cried quietly. I was hopeless and useless, like a scrap of torn rag. All I wanted was to go home. Now, this news. The Russians had attacked Chechnya. Why would they do that? And they had been slaughtered. I could not picture what that would even look like. Somehow, it conjured an image of a medieval army on horseback trying to storm a castle, arrows raining down from the walls. It sent a rude shiver through my body. Could Shorty be lying about this? I studied him closely. No, he was very pleased with his people, with himself for choosing to be born a noble Chechen. I couldn't tell. It seemed the violent death of hundreds of people was more than enough to make him happy. So it must be true. Russians had invaded and the Chechens had killed them. My face and body went numb as I absorbed the horror of it. Wars and battles had always seemed far away to me, abstract, something for other people to worry about. But I was here now, and somehow I was part of this, and it was part of me. "See," he said, smiling broadly as if his favorite football team had won an important match. "It is a very good day." From that moment on, there was no longer quiet in the apartment. When I knocked on the door, I came face to face not with silent armed guards, but with joyful and self-righteous freedom fighters. All of a sudden, the apartment was full of weapons. Shorty never let up. He tried to destroy my spirit whenever he saw me. He enjoyed humiliating the whole Russian nation and Christianity, trying to make me feel ashamed. I heard so much inside, but had to remain silent. How could I respond? I did not want to escalate the conflict with him. It couldn't bring me anything good. I could not fight against this horde of armed bandits. After all, I was their prisoner, and unarmed. Those first days of the war were a scary time. I was a peaceful person and far from politics, but every child in Russia knew where the Chechen hatred was coming from. For 200 years, Russia, the powerful giant, has dominated and controlled tiny Chechnya and its people. In the 1930s, Joseph Stalin expelled the entire Chechen people from their lands and sent them to the Gulag camps of Siberia. The ones who survived were allowed to return home in 1956 after Stalin's death. When the Soviet Union collapsed, some Chechens decided they would be free from Russians once and for all. A man named Johar Dudayev became the Chechen leader, installed himself as president, and declared the independence of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, a country recognized by no one. In Chechnya, Dudayev's propaganda work has built upon the hatred of Russia and Russians among the inhabitants. The people craved revenge for their losses under Stalin, projecting the pain from the past into today's world. Chechen men were shamed into fighting. Chechen propagandists poked their fingers from the TV screen saying, "How long will you, a Chechen man, hide behind your mother's skirt? Pick up your gun and take revenge for the hardship of the past century." The insulted pride of Chechen men forced them to leave houses, and they went to die for the financial interests of the leaders of Ichkeria. But I was not the cause of the discord between nations. I was there for a different reason. I hated politics. I felt equally sorry for the Russian and the Chechen. Astrakhan was home to many cultures, and I grew up among them all, never separating my friends into the Russian ones and the not Russian ones. There are enough bandits and crooks in any nation. So I just kept my silence. These men who held me were not political, they were criminals. I was almost grateful to them because they treated me well. They gave me food and did not hurt me. It seemed like the most I could expect from them. Maybe they were good people who had set foot on the criminal path because of circumstances or because they were brainwashed by the propagandists. Or maybe they were simple beasts subordinated to an invisible someone who was more influential and smarter and who had not yet given the order to hurt me. I did not know, and I was afraid to look deeper. I was afraid to say anything in response to their celebrating. I was just afraid for my life and my well-being, especially because I would go home very soon. I did not want to make the situation any worse than it already was. Shorty's favorite game was to humiliate me. He was a maniac. "I saw more dead Russians today, shot to pieces and begging for their lives. But they find no sympathy here. Such sniveling cowards. Can you imagine? Why don't they send real men? Yeah, I forgot. There are no real men in Russia." The war had finally arrived. In fact, it had started weeks before, with little secret skirmishes, but no one had declared it yet. It had been a quiet little war, one which now would become much bigger and louder. Soon the entire world would hear of it and give a collective cry of horror. Madness, the great statesman would call it. Sheer insanity. Butchery. But I knew nothing of war, this one or any other. The little I knew was that women did not fight in wars. Lucky women stayed home while men marched off and fought and died in wars. Unlucky women were swept away by wars and mowed under them. They were chewed up by wars and sometimes spit out. The politicians in Moscow wanted a war. You might even say they needed a war. But I also knew nothing of politics. The war had come like a tsunami, or a hurricane, or a tornado, or some other natural force much larger than myself. War is a giant, wanton, careless child. It breaks things and then laughs in delight. And now I had become its plaything. The hours of my captivity had evolved into days, the days into weeks, and now the weeks had become more than 2 months. Every day felt like an eternity. Something had gone wrong. I was still imprisoned, and hope was all I had to live by. But the war drained the hope from my body, and my mind, and my soul. What hope could there be when outside the walls of my pathetic cell people were dying by the hundreds? What hope could there be in the face of pointless cruelty? What chance of escape? Would I flee this place and run into the arms of the falling bombs and the spray of machine gun fire? No. The lights had gone out on my former sheltered life, and I descended, fully exposed, into the gathering darkness. It all happened suddenly. It was morning, and I heard a loud commotion outside the door, rapidly approaching footsteps and menacing male voices. Something dangerous was happening. This time I knew it for sure. My nerves were as taut as a ship's ropes. Adrenaline raced through my system. 1,000 chilling thoughts pierced my brain. I was prepared for the worst. The door opened and a short, stocky man appeared in the doorway, Foxy. From behind him, bright daylight burst into my room, streaming from the window in the larger room. I squinted in surprise as my gloomy room was instantly filled with light. After so much time in the shadows, the normal light of day nearly blinded me. For the first time, the curtains on the window behind him were thrown wide open. In my head the thought flashed, "They are going to execute me. I will be shot and killed." They no longer needed to hide their location from a hostage who would not tell anyone anything because she would soon be dead. This day, and all subsequent days, every time the door opened, I would be frozen in fear, expecting something terrible. Approaching footsteps or voices near the door would always bring the most horrible expectations. Emotionally, I was ready to die. I was only hoping for salvation, as I would hope for, but never expect, a miracle. Foxy threw a plastic bag on the bed. "Put on this dress and shawl," he said, his voice whistling. "You're coming with us." His voice was cruel. Something had happened and it made him angry. Everything inside me tightened again in a tangle of fear. Sometimes I still could not believe that all this was really happening, that it was not a nightmare. What are they going to do? An overwhelming sense of horror was my constant companion. I could never get used to this feeling or accept the absurdity of this miserable situation. In the bag, I found a long blue dress and a white square scarf with subtle brown patterns on it. The presence of the dress meant I had to part with the long pink robe which I wore all the time over my black dress. I had to take off my imaginary shield, the thing that made me invisible, the only thing that protected me. I was used to this robe. I realized now that I loved this robe, and I did not want to part with it, but I did. Now I was wearing a floor-length wool dress with long sleeves and a collar under the throat. It was dark blue. I took the little black dress, the one and only thing remaining from the past life, folded it and put it under the pillow, not knowing why. I did not know if I would ever return here again. I covered my head with the scarf in the Russian manner, twisting it around my neck and linking the ends at the back, completely covering my blonde hair under the headdress. My hands and knees trembled. I was in an agony of terror. My life was over. Perhaps the same feelings are experienced by the prisoner sentenced to death. He does not know the exact time of his execution. He only knows that it is coming. There is no escape. He spends every day flinching at any rustle from behind the door. He does not live his life. He does not think. He simply exists and waits for the moment of execution, which could come at any second. They came for me. The door opened and I went into the unknown. The big room and the corridor were filled with people, bearded men, all fully armed. Their faces were blank, and their eyes were hard, killers, every one of them. The blood froze in my veins. There were too many men at once. I could not look at them. Speaking short, guttural phrases to each other, it could have been dogs growling and barking. They led me out of the apartment. Then we were outside in the cold air, moving fast. I could not see what was happening. The men surrounded me in a circle. All I could see was the light of day and the broad backs of the men in front of me. We sprinted, packed in a dense ring, from the building to the car, as if I was the head of state, and these were the men assigned to take a bullet to protect me. Someone pressed my neck down hard, forcing me to bow almost to the ground. The strong man's hand wrapped around my thin neck, his fingers like steel. He hurt me and shoved me into the back seat of a green military jeep. I prayed that someone was outside at this moment and called the police. I lifted my head and looked at the street as I awkwardly scrambled inside. There was not a single person around. The front yard of the building was completely deserted. I was right. I had been held on the first floor of an ordinary apartment complex that was built during the Khrushchev era. It was a residential district of 5-story buildings, nothing special. But I suddenly felt how much I had been missing even this simple image. Trapped in my dark room, my mind had become a blank canvas. The day was cold, early winter. There was a thin, nearly transparent layer of white snow on the ground. I was in the back seat between two armed men. They were talking in their hacking, barking, guttural language. I tried to listen to their words very carefully, but I could not understand a word. I did not know where they were taking me. I prayed for one thing. If they were going to kill me, please let it be instant death. I could not bear torture. The jeep started rolling down the empty boulevard. I had not seen streets in what seemed like a long time. My world had recently acquired rather limited outlines, 12 feet by 12 feet. Foxy was sitting on my left. "Cover your eyes," he said in his hissing voice. He handed me a piece of dark fabric. I wanted to see, but even that had to be taken from me. The endless feeling of fear had become an integral part of my existence. I did not want to cry in despair. In my heart, I hoped that I was being taken to be exchanged. Blindfolded, I pictured the landscapes that we were passing in my imagination. I could not enjoy it. Sandwiched on both sides, I felt the warm flesh of the two gangsters pressing against me. I knew I would never be able to cause them a sense of compassion. For them, I was not a human, but only a means to an end, a way to make money. After a time, Foxy's lisping voice ordered me to take off the bandage. The blackness under the blindfold suddenly turned into gray. It was a gloomy, overcast day, gray skies, gray snowy streets, everything had the same bleak color. The car moved through the streets, into the center of the city, Grozny, the Chechen capital. The name of the city was all I could understand from the conversation of the gangsters. The further we went, the dirtier the road became. Everywhere there was evidence of the recent fighting. Bullet-scarred buildings, charred by fire, burned-out Russian tanks, and trucks thrown askew like broken toys. I was taking no sides in this war. I had my own war to fight, the war to survive, to stay hopeful, to stay alive, to be saved. Outside the window, the picture became even more terrible. The trees were bare, and the new snow was mixed with mud and blood, white and brown mixed together, with jarring smears of bright red. Here the buildings were destroyed, crushed and smashed as if by an army of giants. We were right in downtown Grozny. I stared in shock at the wreckage. I had never seen a war up close. The car stopped at a plaza in the center of the city. They parked near a large tree with massive naked branches spreading out to the sides. I looked around in a stupor, and soon I noticed something lodged between the thick branches. It was not one something. There were several of them. At every crook of the bold tree, one of these things had been carefully placed. I stared and stared at them, trying to make out what they were. Foxy spoke, the intensity of his voice startling me. That's what will be left of all the Russians who come to our country. They were human heads. Cut-off heads of Russian soldiers, plastered with mud and blood, decorated the tree like Christmas bulbs. They were probably very young. They had been boys just recently, certainly so young that they could not even hold their heavy guns right. They had been called up for military service only yesterday. And now they had to remain here forever. Their mothers must be... I could not think. I could not face it. A wave of dizziness and nausea passed through me. How is this possible? Around me in the car, the gangsters prattled among themselves in their unknowable language, their voices excited and cheerful. They were happy. No, they were jubilant. This atrocity, this disgrace, for them it was a victory to be celebrated. They had won the first battle, but not the war. I stared straight ahead, my face numb from the horror. The car lurched into motion again. I expected that I too would be beheaded, and soon. So I prayed quietly and thought about my mother. It only took another 10 minutes to reach our next destination. We came to a stop. "Listen to me," Foxy said, his lisping voice right in my ear. His mouth was so close that I could feel his breath. Then we were face to face, my own breath caught in my throat. His dark eyes bored into mine. His teeth seemed sharp and dangerous. I was so deadened by fear his words did not reach my brain right away, though he spoke simply and with barely an accent. He spoke seriously, his words angry and abrupt, pronouncing each phrase in a clipped and threatening manner. I looked into his close-set eyes, trying to find some humanity in him. "We are going to get out of the car, and you are going to talk to your mother over the phone." I gasped. "I'll be talking to my mom?" "Tell her she has to find the money, the full amount. Tell her that you are alive and you are doing well so far. Tell her that if she gets the money, you will go home unharmed. If not, you'll go home in pieces. In 2 weeks I will cut off your first finger and send it to her by mail. Tell her that. But behave yourself. If you try to scream, no one will help you, and it will only make things worse. I'll shoot you in the arm or the leg, and you'll sit chained to the radiator for the rest of your time here." Foxy's words shocked me like a bolt of lightning from a blue sky. I was not a hero. I was not a special agent trained by the military. I was an ordinary Russian girl. I had never encountered violence in any form before. But in the course of 20 minutes, I had seen dead boys with their heads cut off. And now a man was telling me he would cut me into pieces, or maybe shoot me and chain me to a radiator. I had no idea how to react to the things he was saying. They simply terrified me. But besides the overwhelming fear, another feeling absorbed me even more. I would hear my mama's voice. I missed her so much, it was excruciating. I knew how anguished she must be over my kidnapping, but I had no way to comfort her. She probably didn't know if I was even still alive. The jeep was stopped in front of the main post office. For a while we stayed inside the car, as if the men were waiting for a command. Suddenly, everything was set in motion. All 4 car doors opened at the same time, and all the kidnappers hurried to get out. They didn't have to push me out of the car. I could not wait to hear my mom's voice. I jumped out almost instantly, along with Foxy and 3 others. There were another 3 men outside. I was once again pressed inside a dense circle surrounded by the men. I could not see, but I also did not care. I could not wait to get into the building. A few quick steps and we were on the tiled floor in the building's cool lobby. It was a standard Russian post office. One side of a large hall was lined with telephone booths. On the opposite side, there was the telegram office. A few people milled around, sending letters, making calls. Who knew? They didn't seem to notice us at all. Our tight circle moved quickly down the hall, feet stumbling to keep up, my heart torn by impatience. At the end of the hall a door opened, and I was pushed into a tiny phone booth. Everything happened at lightning speed. Someone gave me the phone receiver, already warmed by someone else's hands. I pressed it against my ear. "Mama!" I could no longer hold back the tears. They ran down my face. I was dying inside. How badly I wanted to dissolve from here and appear at home. I could not stand it any more. Anguish and pain and fear tore me to pieces. On the other end of the phone line, I heard the breath of the most wonderful and lovely person, my favorite person in the world. I could feel her there. I felt her struggling not to weep too, and not fall into despair. I knew that she did not want to show me how bad and hopeless everything was. "Sweetheart," she said and paused, and I heard how she swallowed a lump of tears in silence. She did not want me to hear it. Her voice entered me and tore me up inside. I wanted to die and not feel this unbearable pain any longer. My mom's voice sounded dry and cracked after spilling so many tears. But she tried to instill hope in me. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm going to get you out. Everything will be fine, and we will meet again very soon." "Mama, I'm okay. They just want money." I held the phone, and I did not want to let it go. I wanted to stay here and listen to her voice forever. I was supposed to tell her that they planned to send me in parts and in 2 weeks they would cut my finger off. But I wouldn't do it. It would be better to be killed right now, right here, rather than cause her any more pain. "Sweetie, everything will be okay." She spoke to me in a comforting tone, as in the days when I was a child. She talked to me, her voice washing over me, the words not as important as the sound of her voice. Her talking alone made me feel better, just like in my childhood. Someone started to pull the phone away from me. I grabbed it with both hands, fighting him. I did not want to leave the booth. "I love you, Mom!" I shouted. I heard her screaming, "I love you, Lena! I love you!" At the end, her voice turned to sobs. Someone dragged me from the booth. Stone hands twisted my arms behind my back, snatching the phone away. I could not see. Tears filled my eyes. They raced me back through the post office, pushing me, dragging me. In seconds, I was inside the car. I covered my face with both hands, bent over, and hid my face on my lap, sobbing silently. I didn't want to look at this man. I hated them with all my heart and wished them only death. December 12th, 1994, Astrakhan, Russia. For the woman, each new day was just like all the previous, overflowing with sorrow and grief. The woman avoided people, staying at home all the time, dedicating herself to waiting for the abductors to call. She did not go to work, fearing to miss a phone call. Would they ever call again? The elder had met with the kidnappers, but the operation had failed completely. The angry terrorists did not heed the exhortations of the elder and promised revenge on the prisoner if their demands were not met. For the woman, hope which had appeared for a moment now collapsed. There was no hope at all anymore. All that was left was pain, as if part of her very self had been torn away, and terror for her only child. She did not know how to weather the grief. She no longer spoke, she no longer listened, she no longer thought. She caved into herself. Guilt and powerlessness led her into a downward spiral, deep into depression, and then past it down into something like quiet insanity. One day the telephone rang. She picked it up. The receiver weighed 1,000 pounds. A man's voice was there. "You will speak with your daughter in a minute." The woman froze as if shocked. It was almost impossible to believe that she was going to hear that sweet voice. "Mama!" How much she loved and how much she missed her. She was ready to endure any pain, any physical torture, if only it would bring her daughter home. "Sweetheart," she began. The lump in her throat made it hard to speak. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Are you in pain? I'm going to get you out. Everything will be fine. We will meet very soon. My love, do not lose hope. We should be strong. I'm doing everything to bring you home very soon. We just need more time." She did not believe her own words. Only moments before, she had been abject, with no hope for the future at all. She still had none. Now she was telling her daughter not to give up because soon she would be home. She was lying, not just to the girl but to herself as well. She told a lie because the truth was too hard to face, and because maybe her daughter would believe the lie. She also told it because it was just possible that she herself might come to believe it. "I love you! I love you!" they shouted at the same time. At the other end, a rough man's voice replaced the sound of her daughter. "You have 3 more weeks to get the money. This is your last chance. You've made me angry. After 3 weeks you will get her finger in mail." He hung up. The woman sobbed, racked with the searing pain of loss. The floor seemed to fall away under her feet, along with the last of her strength. She cried out and dropped to her knees, shivering uncontrollably. December 1994, Chechnya. My mother's voice froze in my mind. I could still hear her words. With every single cell of my body, I could feel her emotional pain and how much she was suffering. I knew how difficult it was for her to restrain her tears and show me some way to remain strong in the face of a hopeless situation. It was as if I was trapped at the bottom of a black hole in the earth, an abyss, and she was trying to throw me down a long rope, but deep inside I knew her efforts were futile. The rope would never reach me, and it wouldn't help me climb out anyway. My heart was broken. My mother was the most important person to me in the world. No one else even mattered. We had been fed into the meat grinder of the criminal political system. We were torn to shreds, and we were helpless to do anything. I sat silently shaking from heavy sobs, but the tears did not stop. My eyes hurt from crying so much. The Chechen madman drove me back through the deserted streets to the grey and cold room. I fell into the bed exhausted and spent, totally drained both physically and mentally. I had to wait. I have to be strong, I told myself. This will not last long. I will be saved. It will all soon be over. I tried to believe it, not because I thought it was true, but just because it was what my mother had told me. After a while I had no more tears to cry, and lying in bed I recalled the painful details of the day. I had been so overwhelmed by my own feelings during the trip that I didn't pay attention to what was happening around me. Now, in the darkness, I tried to remember everything to the smallest detail. I wondered how it was possible that all the abductors were carrying huge automatic rifles out in the open. None of them had tried to hide their weapons from the random people around them. Was it the war? Was it Chechen society itself? The endless permissiveness for the crooks, abductors, and gangsters? With the onset of winter, behind the black window, the bright days became shorter. But despite that, they did not seem to pass any more quickly. I was no longer able to navigate time. All I could do was wait. The minutes came to be hours, the days an endless perpetuity. Once there were green bushes outside the window, but now they were completely naked, and the weak sun shone on a deserted courtyard. Through the thin slits between the black paint, it was now almost impossible to see. Everything merged into a sinister, grey mess. Time had stopped. There was no one out there at all. The people had left their homes long before the first assault on Grozny. The Russian government apparently thought they could take over the country with a handful of young soldiers back in November. That never happened. On December 31st, the real war, the serious and bloody war began. Hundreds of Russian armored vehicles, heavy artillery, and aircraft entered Chechnya. I knew that the war had started. Shorty told me. "Your Russian bastards wash in their own blood. We will cut off the head of each and send them by mail to their mothers." I was slowly going insane. The monotony of my existence was suppressing my mind and personality. Every morning I assured myself that the new day would bring me salvation, but by nightfall I was positive that I would not survive the next day, and I would fall into despair. My life seemed senseless and dead-end. One of the worst things in isolation and captivity is that emotions are experienced much more sharply at their extreme. Pain turns into agony, fear into paranoia, and the helplessness into despair. Shorty continued to humiliate me. My life was difficult enough, and now he was turning it into an everyday torture. He would not leave me alone. He would drop into the apartment, open the door to my room, and stand in the doorway playing with his gun in front of my face. "I executed 5 Russian pigs today, weaklings who surrendered instead of fighting to the death like men. They died anyway, sniveling cowards, on their knees, bang, 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 bang." He paused, letting it sink it. "And one last, crying as I put the gun to his head, bang." I became paralyzed, almost as if my body had turned to stone whenever he appeared, but even so, I could barely hold my tongue. The witnesses of his mockery watched it amused. When he got tired, he laughed, and I felt an indescribable joy. I dreamed that he would die in the war. He was my worst enemy. I could not wait for nightfall when the apartment was quieter. The militants dispersed to fight or to spend the night at their own homes, except for a couple of guards who were always there. The night was mine. In peace and tranquility, I played the single Gypsy Kings cassette in the tape recorder, holding the speaker close to my ear, the volume low, so no one could hear it behind the door. I listened to the delightful guitar playing and passionate singing, memories flooding back, and I would sit behind the closed door, isolated from the whole world, and dissolve into a puddle of grief. I mourned my miserable life, recalling the carefree and happy days of my childhood and adolescence. The end of the chapter. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to write a comment, like this video, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time. Stay well.